The desert stretched wide, painted in bruised shades of orange and violet, the horizon shimmering as though the earth itself were trembling with exhaustion. A boy trudged through that fading light, his bare feet blistered, his ribs visible beneath a shirt that had long forgotten the dignity of stitching. Beside him plodded a donkey, a creature so weathered and weary it seemed stitched from the same dust that clung to their skin. Every step was a small rebellion against hunger, thirst, and the cruel patience of the wilderness. The boy's breaths came shallow. He had not eaten a full meal in days, surviving on scraps scavenged from abandoned camps and the rare kindness of strangers who mostly turned their backs. Yet he still placed a calloused hand on the donkey's neck, steadying the animal when it stumbled. "Come on, old friend," he whispered, his voice cracked but tender. "We'll find something tonight. We have to." He tore the last corner of bread from his pocket, stale as stone, and broke it in half. One piece for himself, one for the animal. It was not enough for either, but it was everything he had to give. The donkey chewed slowly, its dull eyes reflecting the boy's tired determination. In the flicker of twilight, they looked like two creatures bound together by loss. Once the boy had been bound by more, parents who believed tomorrow held promise, a home where laughter filled the nights. Fever had taken them both, and with their absence came silence. No one had claimed the boy. No rancher, no family friend, no priest. He had wandered, with the donkey tethered behind, until wandering became the only life left to him. The wind shifted, carrying with it something more than sand. A faint rustle echoed from the canyon edge. The boy froze, his spine prickling. He knew the sounds of desert life, the hiss of a snake, the cry of a hawk, the skitter of lizards. This was none of those. His eyes narrowed, and his fingers curled into fists, though he had no weapon worth raising. He whispered to the donkey, urging silence. The air hung heavy. Then, from the shadows, she appeared. At first, she seemed a mirage. A girl barely older than himself, her hair tangled with dust, her skin marked with scratches from thorn and stone. She staggered, clutching her side, her eyes wild with the disorientation of thirst and pain. The boy's heart hammered. He recognized her dress, the beaded leather, the fringes, the symbols etched into its seams. Apache. His mind reeled with the stories he had overheard around campfires. Raids, ambushes, warriors who moved like shadows. To aid one of them was to invite suspicion, even death. Yet her knees buckled, and the boy's instincts leapt past his fear. He caught her arm before she crumpled, his grip trembling. Her gaze met his, sharp even in weakness, and in that instant he saw not a threat but a person clinging to survival as desperately as he was. He pulled the canteen from his belt, nearly empty, and pressed it to her lips. She drank greedily, coughing as water dripped down her chin, then looked at him with a mixture of confusion and guarded gratitude. The donkey brayed softly, shifting its weight. The boy turned to it, and a painful decision rooted in his chest. He had nothing else to give, nothing but the creature that had been his companion through every lonely mile. He exhaled long and low, and nodded as though convincing himself. "Take him," he told the girl, guiding her toward the donkey. She blinked, uncomprehending at first, until he placed her hand on the animal's rough mane. "He'll carry you. He's stronger than he looks." His voice cracked with forced humor. "Don't fall in love with him, though. He's out of your league." The words tumbled awkwardly into the night, but a faint curl touched her lips, something close to a smile though fleeting. He lifted her onto the donkey's back, the animal swaying under the weight but holding firm. For a moment, she studied him with a solemn intensity, as though committing his face to memory. Then, with a soft tug of the reins, she turned into the darkness, swallowed by shadows and silence. The boy stood alone, the space beside him hollow where the donkey's warmth had always lingered. His throat burned, not from thirst but from the ache of loss, sharper than hunger. The desert stretched wider now, emptier, pressing down with its silence. He dropped to the ground beside his makeshift tent, a ragged canvas draped over broken poles, and drew his knees to his chest. The stars surfaced one by one, cold and distant, and he stared at them as though they might offer answers. Sacrifice had been forced on him before. The loss of his family, the surrender of comfort, the endless trade of dignity for survival. But this was different. This was choice. He had given away the only thing tethering him to hope, not because he was strong, but because he could not watch someone fall when he still had the strength to hold them up. The desert wind curled around him, whispering through the tent flaps like a voice too old to name. Nothing is ever truly lost, it seemed to say. Nothing given in kindness is wasted. Sleep eluded him, each sound in the darkness sharpening his unease. The fire he managed to coax sputtered low, casting weak halos against the sand. His stomach twisted in emptiness. His arms wrapped tighter around himself. He tried to picture the donkey steady under the girl's weight, carrying her safely where she needed to go. That thought became his only comfort. Then came the flicker of light. At first, he thought it was his fire catching a new breath of air, but the glow grew stronger, moving, bending in strange shapes across the sand. His heart lurched. He shifted upright, peering into the horizon. Far beyond the wavering flame, figures emerged, tall, broad, and many. The rhythmic pounding of hooves rolled through the night like distant thunder. The boy's breath caught, his pulse quickening with dread. The firelight revealed them slowly, outlines sharpening. Men on horseback, guns slung, eyes fixed forward. Not one or two. Dozens. Their silhouettes cut against the stars, advancing in a line that stretched like a wall across the desert. He gripped the edge of his tent, every instinct screaming to run, though there was nowhere left to flee. The donkey was gone, the desert offered no cover, and the night itself seemed to hold its breath. His chest rose and fell in quick bursts as he whispered to himself, "What now?" The horses drew closer, their shadows merging into one long streak of darkness. 50 cowboys, silent as judgment, arrayed in a row before his fragile camp. And there, in the flicker of dying flame, the boy realized his life had shifted again. He had given away everything, and yet the desert was about to test whether that sacrifice was only the beginning. The morning broke with a pale, indifferent sun that painted the desert in harsh light, stripping away the gentleness of night. The boy stirred in his tent, his body sore from the cold ground, his lips cracked from thirst. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, but the low rumble of hooves reminded him that the figures he had glimpsed were no dream. He stumbled outside, the dry air burning his throat, and froze. The horizon was no longer empty. They were waiting for him. A long line of horsemen stretched across the sand, their silhouettes stark against the pale sky. 50 cowboys sat tall in their saddles, rifles strapped across their backs, revolvers hanging at their hips. Their faces were carved with years of grit and dust, their eyes sharp, unblinking. The boy's breath hitched. It was as if a wall of iron and leather had risen overnight to block every possible path forward. One of them moved ahead of the line. His horse snorted, stamping its hooves into the earth. The man who rode it was older, his beard peppered with gray, his face weathered into deep lines like cracks in stone. A scar stretched across his cheek, a cruel reminder of battles survived. He regarded the boy with the calm of someone who already knew the answer to every question he might ask. When he spoke, his voice was gravel dipped in smoke. "You're the one," he said. The boy blinked, his body tense, his hands instinctively curling at his sides. "The one what?" His voice came out thin, nearly swallowed by the desert wind. The cowboy's eyes narrowed. "The one who gave a donkey to an Apache." The words sliced the air, heavy with accusation. The boy's chest tightened. He thought of the girl's trembling hands, her parched lips against his canteen, the way she had vanished into darkness with the only companion he had left. His silence stretched too long, and the men behind the leader stirred, shifting in their saddles, hands brushing the butts of their pistols. "I didn't." The boy stopped, swallowed, then tried again. She was hurt. Thirsty. I just gave her water and my donkey. That's all. A ripple moved through the line of cowboys. A grim murmur carried on their voices. One spat into the dirt. Another shook his head slowly, muttering something the boy could not catch. The leader remained still, eyes fixed on him as though weighing the truth of his words against the cost of believing them. You got a choice, kid, the leader said finally. You tell us where she went, or we'll assume you're lying through your teeth. His hand rested casually on the grip of his revolver, but there was nothing casual in the tension that thickened around him. The boy's pulse raced. He wanted to shout that he didn't know, that she had disappeared into the dark without a word, that he had been left as empty-handed as he had been before. But his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. Every gaze in that line bore down on him, a weight that threatened to crush the fragile defiance gathering in his chest. I don't know where she went, he managed, voice shaking but steady enough to hear. I just helped her. That's it. Silence stretched. A few of the men laughed, harsh, humorless sounds that cracked like whips in the air. One tilted his hat back and said, Kid, you sure know how to pick your friends. Another added, Next thing, he'll be sharing blankets with rattlesnakes. The laughter spread, cruel in its sharpness, but it did nothing to ease the tension. The leader raised a hand, and the noise fell dead. His gaze stayed locked on the boy, and for the first time his voice softened, though it carried no warmth. That girl is no ordinary wanderer. She's the daughter of an Apache chief. They've been searching for her, and now every white man in these parts is looking too. You helping her? He leaned closer in the saddle, his eyes narrowing into slits. That makes you a part of this war, whether you like it or not. The boy's knees weakened. His head swam with the enormity of what he had stumbled into. He had thought only of saving her life. Now the act was being rewritten into something larger, something dangerous. I didn't mean, his words faltered. The weight of 50 guns pointed in his direction pressed against his lungs. He wanted to insist that he had no part in any war, that he was just a boy with nothing but dust and hunger, but the truth hardly mattered in the desert. Intentions were swallowed by consequences. The leader straightened, his decision made. Here's how it is. You're gonna find her. You're gonna bring her back or tell us where she's hiding. If you don't. He tapped his revolver, a gesture as casual as it was final. We'll take it as a sign you've thrown in with them. The boy's mouth went dry. The words struck with the force of a sentence already carried out. He felt the eyes of every cowboy on him, saw the tight grips on reins and gun belts, heard the restless snorts of horses sensing their riders' tension. The desert seemed smaller, tighter, as though the air itself waited for his answer. He looked down at his hands, small and empty, trembling against the dust. What could he do? He had no donkey now, no weapon, no allies. The choice was a trap dressed as freedom: betray the girl who had trusted him, or face the wrath of men who would not hesitate to bury him where he stood. His chest rose and fell in rapid bursts, his heartbeat pounding against the cage of his ribs. The leader gave a curt nod, and the line of cowboys shifted, their formation tightening like a noose. You've got until sundown tomorrow. Fail us, and you'll wish the desert had finished you off first. With that, they pulled their horses back into line. The leader turned without waiting for reply, and the mass of riders began to withdraw, dust swirling in their wake. The boy remained rooted to the ground, watching them retreat, though their words clung to him like burrs. The rumble of hooves faded, but the threat they carried did not. He sank to his knees, pressing his hands into the dirt, as if grounding himself against the weight of what had just been forced upon him. His throat tightened, and for a long moment he could not breathe. He wanted to believe this was a nightmare, but the imprint of 50 riders against the desert floor told him otherwise. The sun rose higher, its heat pressing down, mocking the chill that ran through his veins. He stared at the horizon where the cowboys had vanished, then at the opposite stretch where the Apache girl had disappeared the night before. 2 directions, 2 worlds, both equally dangerous. He was caught between them now, and there was no path that promised survival. As the wind whipped across the desert, carrying with it a low whistle through the rocks, the boy whispered to himself, "What have I done?" The question lingered in the air, unanswered, heavy with the promise of trials yet to come. And as the sun climbed mercilessly higher, the boy knew that the desert had not finished testing him. It had only just begun. The desert gave him no rest. Even as the cowboys vanished into the horizon, their threat clung to the boy like a brand pressed against his skin. He sat for a long while in the dust, the silence of the wilderness gnawing at his nerves. He could not stay where he was, not with sundown tomorrow looming like a noose. His legs ached when he rose, his stomach hollow, but the urgency in his chest propelled him forward. The girl had gone east into the darker canyons. That was the only trail left to him, and so east he went. The land grew crueler as the sun climbed higher. Jagged rocks tore at his feet. Dry shrubs clawed at his legs. He walked until the sweat ran like fire into his eyes, until his lips split with thirst, until every breath rasped like sandpaper. Yet he pressed on, muttering to himself, forcing his mind to stay sharp. Step, breathe, step, breathe. Words became rhythm, rhythm became survival. By midday, heat shimmered across the sand in waves, turning the earth into a trick of the eye. He stumbled, fell to his knees, pressed his palms into the scorched ground. Coyotes howled from the ridges, their voices taunting, reminding him that the desert had no pity for the weak. He forced himself up, his limbs trembling, and pressed forward again. Fear gnawed at him, not only of dying here, but of failing her, of letting the cowboys decide the end of his story before it had barely begun. Shadows lengthened as clouds gathered, dark and heavy. The desert sky could shift with a mood, and soon the first roll of thunder cracked open the silence. Rain was a blessing and a curse. It cooled his body but turned the ground to treacherous mud, forcing him to wade through sudden streams that tore across the canyon floor. Lightning illuminated cliffs that rose like jagged teeth around him. He slipped more than once, scraping knees and palms raw, but every fall made him rise faster. Each scar felt like a bargain struck against the desert's cruelty, pain for progress. That night he lit no fire, fearing the glow might betray him. Instead, he huddled beneath an outcrop of rock, shivering as wind funneled through the canyon. Hunger gnawed deeper, twisting his stomach into knots. He thought of the donkey, plodding faithfully under the girl's weight. A pang of grief welled up, sharp and sudden. He had given away more than a beast of burden. He had given away his only family. Yet in the ache of loss lay a flicker of resolve. If she was alive, then his sacrifice had not been wasted. That thought alone kept him from despair. The following morning, the desert softened, as if in apology for its violence. The air smelled faintly of wet earth. Birdsong drifted faintly from mesquite trees. For the first time in days, he felt the land might not be entirely against him. He followed the narrow trail carved by hooves, faint but visible if he looked closely. It wound deeper into the canyon until the walls tightened, closing him into a labyrinth of stone. Each echo of his footsteps carried like a warning through the stillness. Then came the sound. Not wind, not water, but voices. Low, rhythmic, rising and falling like waves. He pressed himself against the canyon wall, heart pounding, ears straining. Torches glowed ahead, their light flickering against the rock. He crept closer, each step cautious, until the passage opened into a hollow encircled by fire. There they were, Apache warriors, painted and solemn, seated around the flames. Women tended to pots of food, children clung to their mothers' skirts, and hunters sharpened spears and knives. At the center, proud and commanding, sat a man adorned with feathers, his gaze sharp even from a distance. The boy needed no introduction. This was the chief. Before he could retreat, hands seized him from behind. Two warriors had flanked him, silent as shadows. They dragged him forward, their grips like iron, until he was thrown into the light of the fire. Gasps rippled through the circle. Some reached for weapons, eyes blazing with suspicion. The boy scrambled to his knees, dirt clinging to his skin, fear coiled tight in his chest. He expected death, swift and merciless. Then she stepped forward. The girl. Her hair was combed now, her wounds tended, her clothes brushed clean. She stood taller, stronger, though her eyes softened when they fell on him. She spoke quickly in her language, her voice urgent, her gestures directed at the chief. The boy caught none of the words, but he felt the tension shift. The warriors' grips loosened, though their stares remained fierce. The chief rose. His presence silenced the camp with nothing more than a movement of his hand. He approached the boy slowly, each step deliberate. His shadow swallowed the boy until he stood over him, a figure of both judgment and authority. When he spoke, his English was rough but clear. "You gave her your water. You gave her your animal. Why?" The boy swallowed, his mouth dry. He searched for words that would not betray him. "Because she needed them," he said at last, his voice quiet but steady. "Because I couldn't watch her die." The chief's eyes lingered on him, as if weighing the truth behind the simplicity of his answer. Then, to the boy's shock, the chief reached down and lifted him to his feet. The gesture was not gentle, but it was not cruel. The warriors murmured, their expressions unreadable. "She is my daughter," the chief said. "She returned because of you." He gestured toward the fire, toward the circle of his people. "For that, you are not enemy." Relief washed over the boy so quickly his knees nearly buckled again. He had braced for death, and instead had been given reprieve. The girl stepped closer, her eyes shining with something more than gratitude. She spoke a single word, soft, melodic. The chief translated with a faint nod. "She calls you brother." A warmth stirred in the boy's chest, fragile but real. Brother. It was a word he had not heard in years, not since fever took the only family he had known. His throat tightened, and he blinked against the sting of tears. The tension around the fire eased. Food was offered, thick stew that smelled richer than anything he had tasted in months. He ate in silence, aware of the eyes still watching him, weighing his presence, measuring his worth. Yet even in that scrutiny there was no malice. He was an outsider, yes, but not condemned. One elder studied him for a long moment, then shook his head with a small, crooked smile. "Too skinny to be warrior," he muttered in broken English, prompting a ripple of laughter from those nearby. "Feed him before wind carries him away." The boy managed a weak laugh of his own, the sound strange in his throat. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was not alone, not entirely adrift in the desert. Yet as the fire crackled and the voices rose again around him, a shadow still lingered in his thoughts. The Cowboys had not given up. Their threat was real, their deadline closing in. And though he had found refuge here, he knew it was fragile as the truce between two worlds always on the brink of war. The flames flickered, throwing sparks into the night sky. The boy lifted his gaze to the stars beyond, their cold light watching in silence. For a moment, he let himself feel the rare comfort of belonging. But beneath it all, unease coiled like a rattlesnake in the dark, waiting for the next strike. The boy awoke to the sound of drums. They beat slow and steady, echoing through the canyon like the pulse of the earth itself. Smoke from the morning fire curled into the pale sky, carrying with it the smell of roasted meat and damp cedar. For a moment, he allowed himself the illusion of safety. The Apache girl moved among her people with easy grace, her voice soft as she greeted her kin. The chief sat with his elders, their faces solemn, their words low and measured. Yet even as the camp stirred with life, unease gnawed at the boy's gut. The Cowboys' ultimatum had not vanished with the dawn. Sundown was close, and so too were they. By midday, the desert confirmed his fear. Dust rose on the horizon, not stirred by wind but by hooves. The boy's chest tightened as the line of riders appeared once more, their formation hard and deliberate. 50 cowboys, steel glinting under the merciless sun, rode with the certainty of men who believed themselves owed an answer. The Apache camp bristled instantly. Warriors readied their bows, women pulled children into the shadows, and the chief rose to his full height, his presence commanding silence. The riders halted at the edge of the camp, the leader pushing forward. His scarred face carried no expression, though his hand rested close to the butt of his revolver. "Kid," he called, his voice sharp across the stillness. "You've had your time. Where is she?" Every eye in the camp turned toward the boy. His throat closed, words choking before they could form. The girl stood behind him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, as if lending him strength. He could not betray her, not after all he had lost to keep her alive. Yet defiance meant death, for him, for her, perhaps for everyone here. The air quivered with tension, the world balanced on the edge of a blade. He stepped forward, legs trembling but spine straight. "She's here," he said, his voice cracking then strengthening. "And she's safe. Because I gave her what I had." He swallowed, the weight of his fear pressing against his ribs. "If you're here to take her, you'll have to go through me." Laughter erupted among the riders, harsh and mocking. One spat into the dirt. Another jeered. "Look at him, skin and bones, standing like he's 10 feet tall." Yet their leader did not laugh. His eyes locked on the boy, narrowing with something between irritation and reluctant respect. Before he could reply, an arrow whistled through the air, embedding itself in the sand at the hooves of his horse. The animal reared, neighing in alarm. The Apache warriors had drawn their bows, arrows notched and ready. The cowboys' hands went to their guns in unison, the metallic rasp of steel breaking the fragile silence. Chaos erupted in an instant. A shot cracked, then another. Horses screamed, arrows hissed, the air filled with dust and smoke. The boy dropped to the ground as bullets ripped past him, the world spinning in violence. He scrambled to his knees, heart hammering, ears ringing. The desert had exploded into war. Short, sharp bursts of sound filled the canyon. Gunfire, cries of pain, the clash of steel against bone. He saw a cowboy fall, clutching his chest, an Apache warrior stagger with an arrow in his thigh. The boy's vision blurred, fear threatening to paralyze him. But then he saw her, the girl, cornered as a rider aimed his revolver at her. Without thinking, the boy lunged, grabbing a rock and hurling it with all his strength. It struck the man's arm, knocking his shot wide. The donkey's absence burned in his chest, but he imagined its stubborn courage carrying him forward. The rider turned, fury twisting his features, gun lifting again. The boy braced for the end, but before the trigger pulled, the girl drove a knife into the man's side. He toppled, dragging his horse down with him. For a heartbeat, silence fell in that corner of the chaos, and the boy met the girl's eyes. They burned not with fear, but with fierce determination. All around them the battle surged. Dust choked the air, blood darkened the sand, screams carried on the wind. The boy stumbled forward, seizing the arm of a wounded warrior, dragging him to safety behind a boulder. Then he pulled a fallen cowboy out of the line of fire, the man's blood soaking his hands. He did not stop to question why, only that both sides were men, both bleeding, both breaking under the madness of pride and vengeance. At last, the chief's voice thundered above the clamor. His command rang through the canyon, cutting like a blade. The Apache warriors froze, their bows still drawn. The cowboy leader, breathing hard, raised his hand, halting his men. The fighting ebbed into stillness, broken only by the groans of the wounded. Dust settled slowly, revealing the carnage left behind. The boy stood in the center, his chest heaving, his body shaking. Blood streaked his arms, though most was not his own. He turned to the leader of the cowboys, then to the chief, his voice trembling but clear. "Enough. I'm just a boy. I have nothing, no land, no people, no weapons. But I won't let this go on. I gave what I had so someone else could live. Isn't that worth more than this? Silence followed, heavy and expectant. The chief's gaze softened, though his jaw remained firm. The cowboy leader studied the boy for a long, unbearable moment, then gave a sharp nod. "You've got more grit than sense, kid," he muttered. "But maybe that's what we need." He holstered his revolver, turning his horse. One by one, the riders followed, retreating into the distance. The camp remained tense, bows still taut, until the chief raised his hand. Slowly, the warriors lowered their weapons. The girl stepped beside the boy, her presence steady, her eyes proud. The chief approached and placed a hand on his shoulder, the weight of it heavy with meaning. "You are not enemy," he said. "You are brother." The boy's knees nearly buckled. He had come with nothing, given away everything, and yet somehow found himself standing taller than he ever had before. Around him, the Apache murmured approval, and even the wounded cowboy he had dragged from the fire looked at him with reluctant gratitude. As night fell, the fires burned high, casting long shadows against the canyon walls. The boy sat apart for a moment, staring at the stars. He thought of the donkey, gone but not forgotten, and felt a pang of grief mingled with pride. He thought of his parents, and wondered if somewhere beyond those stars they could see what he had become. The narrator's voice whispered like wind through the night. He had been nothing, yet he gave everything. And in that giving, he had carved himself a place where none had existed before. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.